Stand by. We are now live.
Okay, at 5:03, I'll call to order the Finance Committee for today, November 12th, and if we could get a roll call, please.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Councillor Cassett.
Here.
Councillor Lindell. Councillor Faulkner. Councillor Lee Garcia en route.
He'll be here in a minute.
And Chair Romero Worth.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay, need to approve the agenda. Do we have changes to the agenda?
Madam Chair, no changes. However, some of the items to be pulled did change.
Okay, so, yeah, but we're not doing consent, right? We're just doing the agenda. So we'll do that when we do consent. Is that all right?
Yep.
Okay. So is there a motion to approve the agenda? Motion to second. A motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? That motion passes. Now on to approval of the consent agenda. I do know we have a number of things that have been pulled, and maybe you could just go through that and then whatever other changes you wanted to.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Yes, thank you. We have item E, item H, item I, and item J that have been pulled for discussion.
Okay, and then anything else you wanted to say?
No, Madam Chair, one item was just resolved, so
Okay.
it's not being pulled.
Okay, is there a motion? Second. Motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as amended. All those in favor, aye. Any opposed? That motion passes. Okay, so from there we go on to our presentations. We have two presentations tonight. The first one is general obligation bond issuance process, and we have a number of guests, consultants here tonight. In addition, Director Oster, your name is on this, so maybe you want to take it and introduce the folks who we have to help walk us through how we're going to handle issuing general obligation bonds now that the voters have approved them with overwhelming support to fix streets. So I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, absolutely. So we have our slides up here on the screen. They are also in both PrimeGov and Civic Clerk. We are using both systems simultaneously for this meeting tonight. So I will show the materials up on the screen, and I am delighted to be joined this evening by George Williford of Hilltop Securities. Hilltop is our municipal bond advisor. We also have Mr. Peter Franklin of Modrell Sperling. Modrell is our bond counsel. So Peter and George are going to walk us through this evening the next steps now that the GO bond has been approved by the voters. And George, I think, are you going to be speaking first?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
And really quickly, I don't
Okay.
see Peter on the screen. Is he coming later or?
I see Peter. There he is.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah.
Sorry. All right.
Sorry,
Welcome.
I'm pretty bad at this remote stuff still.
No worries. I just wanted to make sure that if you were out there in, I don't know, Zoom no man's land, that we brought you into the room. So good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being
Good to
here.
see
All
you.
right. Sorry. Back to you, Director Oster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will turn it over to George and Peter to start taking us through the materials, and I will make this a little bit bigger here. Okay, so I think we're ready to dive in.
Okay. Madam Chair and members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be before you, and congratulations on passage of the GO bond question. And the information we provided is somewhat summary type information. First, the timing addressed. We have worked closely with Ms. Oster and then the City Secretary's Office agenda person as well to work out a proposed timetable, and as it shows there, and we've got the calendar following this, we would be in a position so that the GO issue could be sold through competitive bid on approximately March 26th. If that were the case, then the funds, the full proceeds sold would be received by mid-April. I want to interject something before we go too far because Ms. Oster and I have talked. You had voter approval for $25 million. You don't have to sell the full $25 million, but if it's deemed that it's timely and within the next 3 years, funds could in fact be expended, well, then you might want to proceed with the whole issue. But that's a decision that's still to be made by city staff and council. The sale will be conducted after we distribute, and you've been around prior sales, an offering document in the municipal finance world. It's called an official statement, very similar to a prospectus and other type securities offerings, and it will contain information on the tax base, finances of the city, as well as specific security information that is required. And then it'll also reflect the ratings that the city achieves on the GO issue. Along with distribution of that, we'll send out a notice of sale and publish that in industry publications, periodical, announcing that bids will be accepted at a specific time on March 26th or whatever that specific date is. And it'll give instructions for how the bids need to be constructed. The next page is the detailed calendar. And I failed to say I'd invite Peter, even though I sent this presentation, like I said, a lot of it was joint work, and in particular him kind of guiding the when the legislation and actions needed to occur and so on. So chime in anytime, Peter. But as you see, this provides that the introduction of a bond parameters ordinance would occur at a regular council meeting on January 15th, then be before Public Works and Utilities Committee, February 3rd, Finance Committee, February 10th, so that then the council meeting to hold a public hearing and consider adoption of the ordinance would be on February 26th. We would plan to hold off on everything connected with the specific sale until we knew that council had in fact given the go-ahead and approval. And as you see, that would start immediately after the council meeting. We would send the preliminary official statement in draft form to the rating agencies and schedule calls with them, or have already scheduled the calls, and hope to hold those at, say, that first week in March, give a week to 10 days for them to do their analysis, go to committee, and the ratings then back in hand are received March 14th, roughly. And once we have those, then we could put those into the preliminary official statement, distribute it, and as you see, that would lead up to that sale on March 26th, then closing mid-April. You want to proceed, Emily? The other information following this is really, you've seen it back in August when we discussed prospective GO issuance. This is just the current outstanding GO bonds that the city has. The final one matures 2034, so in all, relatively short existing debt. I believe the next page shows the debt service associated with the outstanding GO debt, and we'll be taking that into consideration when we're structuring this upcoming issue, and to some extent wrapping around that as needed. The page 5 is the historical tax rate for debt service, the levy rate. As you'll see, 23 and 24, it was 0.408. That was what we used as a base in our calculations and in what was communicated to the council and also to the public with respect to impact of a new issue. The next page is the historical valuation. And when we talked in August, we really did not have the 2024 tax year values in hand, and we do now. Again, reasonably high growth. The city, except for that 1 year in 21, which was, midst of COVID, has had well over 2%, and in some cases, 23 in particular, double-digit growth in assessed value. And just as a reminder, the assessed value is literally 1/3 of the market value of the taxable property in the city. The next page is really, I know what you're probably most interested in. This is if the full $25 million is sold, what would the impact be? And you'll see in the middle of the page, it shows principal, interest, and total debt service under a box that shows the $25 million issuance. So this assumes that the full authorized amount is issued at one time. And you'll see it shows capitalized interest. What that means is, since you've already set a levy rate for this year, we would capitalize a portion of the interest to offset some of the impact going in. And then you'll look over on the second column from the right where it says mill rate, and that's at the projected values. You'll see over on the left-hand side what the total GO debt service would, the tax rate that would be calculated necessary to support it. That's not a given at this point, because if values, as they have historically, outgrow the growth that we've assumed over on the left-hand side, then the required levy rate would, of course, be lower. One thing that I found encouraging after we got the values and after I was updating this, a couple of things. First, you're seeing an interest rate in that box in the middle of 4.5%. For AA rated GO debt today, that is a good 50 to 60 basis points or more higher than current interest rates. So it's hoped that the interest rate on the actual issue could come in lower. And then also, I mentioned the value, but with that updated value, the 53.63 cent mill rate that you see in 2027, which is the maximum, is only 12.83 cents above the current 0.408. And you'll see on the next page, which I believe is the last page, how that impacts various values of property. But what I found encouraging is what we had told and what was communicated to the voters was that the increase would be closer to 15 cents. So already this year's values have enabled that to be reduced. And again, if values grow and interest rate is more favorable, well, hopefully that impact would be lessened as well. But with that, I would be glad to answer any questions you might have, or let Peter interject anything from bond counsel perspective.
Mr. Franklin, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I would just add one quick thing. The parameters bond ordinance would delegate authority to the finance director, Ms. Oster, to accept the best bid for the bonds. As the bonds are being competitively sold, there will be a bunch of bids submitted, and George will figure out which one is the best and recommend it to Emily, who will then sign a pricing certificate, which would then be presented to the city council at a subsequent meeting. So I just wanted to point out that delegation of authority.
Thank you. Director Oster, do you have anything to add?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, George and Peter, for this helpful presentation. I think this was a great overview to give us an idea of what comes next now that we've gone through the election process for the bonds. One thing that George mentioned that I just wanted to circle back on is that these numbers here, particularly this table here, show uh, the financial impact of issuing the full $25 million. The city doesn't necessarily have to do that. I believe we have up to 4 years to issue the full 25 million that we have authority of. So we'll need to work out the schedule and determine, how we want to go about issuing these bonds. So that'll be coming as well in the next few months. But I think it's great that this bond issue had wide support from the community, and I look forward to investing in our roadways with these bond proceeds.
Okay, and I just want to point out a couple things for the committee. One of the reasons to do this in tranches essentially is that there is a requirement that once you sell the bonds and you have the money, you have to spend it within, it's 3 years, is that correct, Director Oster?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Franklin, if
So there's a safe, that is basically correct, Madam Chair. There's a safe harbor if 85% of the proceeds are spent within 3 years. We like to sort of shift attention away from the safe harbor so that as close to the full amount of the proceeds is expended in 3 years, but that's basically how that works.
Okay, and then just correct me if I'm wrong, and part of the reason we're doing that is to make sure that the bonds stay tax exempt?
That is also pretty much correct. If for some reason the proceeds, less than 85% of the proceeds were expended at the 3-year mark, there are various remedial actions that can be taken to protect the tax exempt status of the bonds. The primary one is that the city would have to restrict let me start again. If there are unexpended proceeds, the city would need to restrict the investment return on those proceeds to the bond yield. In an extreme situation where an issuer has spent really very little of the proceeds at the 3-year mark, the commissioner of the IRS could take the position that the bonds should not have been issued, and that would potentially take away the tax exempt status of the bonds. But that doesn't occur very often. That's really sort of an extreme situation.
Okay, I think that's helpful just to give us a full context for all the pieces that are at work here in figuring out how we go about spending the 25 million that voters have approved overwhelmingly. I guess I do have one question. The process that you laid out starting in January, culminating in March, every time if we were to do this in tranches, for lack of a better word, like let's say we do 10 million next year and we do another 10 in a year or two or whatever the time period is, we do this whole process over?
That is
Yes, Madam
correct.
Chair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry,
So,
George.
okay, perfect. Turn it over to the committee. Questions from the committee? Counselor, whoever you are, Cassett.
Thank you.
Haven't seen you in a while.
I know it has been a while. So just to follow up, Director Oster, on what you were saying in terms of discussing how we will be spending and selling, and if we are going to be doing it in tranches, which makes me always think of Rich Brown. Will that be part of, so would that be something that we would vote on in January or as part of this process? When will this be presented to us? What does that process look like? And then again, as Councilor Merworth was asking, you know, are we going to vote on a spending plan now that would lay it out of how it's going to look for the next, you know, 4 years of when sales will be happening? Or is that something that would continually come back to us as we assess, you know, interest rates and where we are with being able to spend things out and what our contracts look like? So curious how iterative of a process this is.
George,
you
do you
for
want to
that
take
question.
that? Or, I'm sorry,
Well,
Director
and-
Oster?
That
Please
was
go
what I
ahead.
was
Tell
gonna
us how you
say.
typically see that go. Okay, thanks.
I think we're deferring to you, Mr. Franklin, or
Oh. So I think it would be simplest to have to have made a decision about the amount of bonds to be sold pursuant to the ordinance that is initially introduced to the council. It could be possible, I think, to approve a parameters ordinance authorizing the sale of one or more series of bonds, but I think to approve a specific series that is less than the full 25 million, rather than delegating authority, we would probably want to come back to the governing body with a sale resolution laying out all those terms. I'm not, I'd have to take a look, but I'm not sure we could actually delegate authority to decide how big the first series is if it is less than 25 million. I could take a look at that. I have not seen that happen before. George, maybe you have.
I have not in New Mexico. I have in other areas seen delegation of a not, you know, subject to a not to exceed amount. But I defer to you. And then as I was about to say, it would really be Ms. Oster and the Director of Public Works to sit down and map out what they felt like was a realistic project and expenditure schedule, and then us seeing what fit within the 3-year time frame from that standpoint.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. No further questions.
the questions from the committee? Okay, Director Oster, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I wanted to thank George and Peter for being with us tonight. We're very fortunate to have excellent guidance on this process for both the bond council side and the municipal bond advisor side. So thank you so much, George and Peter, for laying out the next steps in terms of getting these bonds issued and making the funding available to support that list of road projects that we discussed earlier this year. I
Thank
think
you
that
for the
concludes-
opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. That concludes this presentation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. I was going to ask if you had anything else to add, but it sounds like you're good. Okay, we are going to move on then. And we have another presentation. We have the City of Santa Fe Revenue Fiscal Year 2024 Review. And I believe we have a number of people who are going to assist with this.
Madam Chair, I'm going to be the primary presenter on this one, and we do have several Finance Department team members here in the room and one online. Let me just make sure. Online participant? I think we do. I think we have everyone. Great, okay. The second presentation is this City of Santa Fe revenue presentation, which is a review of our fiscal year 2024 information. I want to start by saying this is unaudited at this point. You know, we haven't completed, we're getting very close to completing the FY24 audit, but it's still in process. So this information that we're going to be highlighting for you from FY24 is currently unaudited. and it will be based on actual information. A lot of times when we present to you in Finance Committee, we're speaking about budget information, but this presentation focuses on actual. And the overarching, theme here is about where does the city get its money? That's what we're hoping to, to speak to today in terms of our funding for different types of city services and different functions of city government. So we're not going to talk about every single revenue source today because there are a number of small revenue sources, but we'll focus on the major revenue sources that make up the city's coffers. GRT, of course, we spend a lot of time talking about, and here that's gross receipts tax. That forms a significant portion of the revenue, particularly for our general fund. We also are fortunate to have quite a bit coming in through intergovernmental grants, both from the federal and the state government. And then we have one new revenue source in cannabis excise tax, which we'll show you is, pretty small in relation to something like GRT, but it's always good to diversify revenues, and we're glad to have a new revenue source coming into the city. Again, like I mentioned, this is going to cover actuals from FY24, which is our most recent completed fiscal year. We'll talk about how these different revenue sources impact our city's operations and services, and hopefully provide a comprehensive understanding of the city's financial foundation. Moving on to the next slide, we have a pie chart here that breaks out our actual revenue from all sources. So you can see here that the biggest revenue source that we have is taxes. That includes gross receipts tax, property tax, lodgers tax, and even, the cannabis excise tax and some other smaller taxes. The next largest revenue source we have is fees and services, and a lot of that comes in through our public utility department. And the public utility funds, water, wastewater, and environmental services, are what we call enterprise funds, which means that the money generated by those funds stays within those funds and then is reinvested to pay expenses of those funds. So I would say the most important thing to know about most of the fees and services revenues is that they can only be used on a specific purpose. For example, water utility revenue can only be used on the water utility system. And then you can see it drops off quite a bit from there. Transfers are inter fund activity within funds of the city. So those are, not external revenue sources, they're movement between funds. You can see intergovernmental grants, while it's significant, is only 3% of the total revenues in relation to 44% for taxes or 33% for fees and services. Within the taxes category, I just wanted to note a couple of revenue sources that are substantial. Lodgers tax is 17.9 million. That's, out of a total of 206 million, which, so, it's a lot of money, but it's a relatively small percentage of the total we bring in through taxes. We also have property tax included in there, and the majority of it is gross receipts tax. If you were to look at a similar type of pie chart for a county, for example, Santa Fe County, the tax breakout would be very different. The property tax proportion would be much higher, and the gross receipts tax proportion would be much smaller. So the funding formula for cities and counties differs in that regard. We're much more dependent on gross receipts tax, and counties are much more dependent on property tax. Speaking of gross receipts tax, this next slide has a really helpful breakout of what does our gross receipts tax consist of. So our gross receipts tax here in the city of Santa Fe is currently 8.1875 cents for every dollar that's spent within the city. Of that, 4.875 cents is the state share. So that amount goes to the state. In terms of how gross receipts tax is collected, the gross receipts tax returns are remitted to the state tax and rev department. They handle all of the money, and then they distribute it out based on this allocation here on the right side of this slide. So we don't receive gross receipts tax directly from taxpayers. We receive our distribution of gross receipts tax from the state taxation and revenue department. So when the gross receipts tax comes in, the state keeps 4.875% or 4.875 cents out of every dollar in sales. And then the county gets 1.5% or 1.5 cents out of every dollar. And then you'll see that we've provided a breakout of all of the cities' gross receipts tax increments. We have the city capital improvement plan, the city general operations, municipal gross receipts tax, municipal GRT for environmental, and then municipal GRT for infrastructure. And you can see how that all comes together to add up to that total of 8.1875% or 169,534,947 in actual GRT revenue. Again, that's unaudited, but those are our preliminary results.
Can I pause right here and just, I think this is good, big overview. And for anybody listening who maybe isn't versed in this, if you could just speak to the fact that because we get this revenue from the state as an allocation of the overall amount and the way it's split up, there's a bit of a drag. There's a couple months delay before we actually receive what we're due. Because they take it in and then they figure out what portion we get. And maybe I just explained it for you, but if you want to try again, I'll be quiet.
Excellent job, Madam Chair. That is correct. So I would call it a timing difference. So there are 3 different months that are relevant to the distribution process. The first month is the month that the sale actually took place. So for example, sales that are happening now in November of 2024. So that's what we call the economic activity, whenever the actual sale took place. Then the next month, the taxpayer's tax return is due to the state by the 25th of the following month. So the gross receipts tax return for November of 2024 will be due on Christmas Day this year, December 25th to the state. It's always due on the 25th of the month after the sale occurred. And then Tax and Rev distributes the money to local governments or to all of their beneficiaries the month after that. So we will actually receive the distribution for gross receipts tax generated from sales occurring now in November of 2024 in January. So that's how that works. So
essentially, it's a 2-month time from the point of sale to when we get it. And I just think that's important. And I think most of us know that from reading the GRT reports that we get from you. But I think since we're doing a big overview, it's helpful to understand that we don't get that money right away.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. Yeah, that is important. And another piece that I would add to that is we don't get any reporting on it until we receive the distribution. So Tax and Rev, we don't have any preliminary estimates or any preliminary numbers. We just have to wait until we get the actual distribution from Tax and Rev in January to see what November actually looked like. We have our forecast, we have budgeting, forecasts that we use, and we have Riley White, our economist, who helps us with our forecasting and our projection, as well as Andy, who does an excellent job in our budget department as far as projecting what those gross receipts tax numbers are going to be. But we won't know what our actual gross receipts tax looks like for November until January when we receive that distribution. Any other questions or thoughts on gross receipts tax?
Well, I do think that this is an important point as you're noticing the percentage that does not necessarily everything go into the general fund. So I think that there sometimes is this thought that any GRT is free money, or not free obviously, but open money that we can allocate as we wish. But we do have allocations going to specific areas, and that's set in city ordinances, correct? And what is kind of the history, the thoughts around these things. I mean, I see it's, public safety, the rail yard has one. But I'm curious about those breakdowns, and why they are occurring, and that this just happened to be something that at one time, somebody thought that this area needs a specific allocation. So if you could speak to that a little bit more.
Sure, certainly. So, as we've been talking about, there are different components of the gross receipts tax. The total of 8.1875 consists of the state's share, the county's share, and the city's share. And the city's share is broken down into what we call different increments that over time the city has enacted for different purposes. So I don't have the full history right now, but what I can tell you is that it's been a very long time since the city has enacted any new GRT increments. I did do some research. I don't have that in front of me right now, but I want to say the last time was around the time the state eliminated the tax on food and medicine, which was during the Richardson administration, I believe 2006 or 7. So it's been quite a while. I don't know if Andy or any of the finance team members know the history on when the last time the city did a local option.
Yeah, and if I can jump in here, I think this is very complicated. We probably don't want to be speaking without doing the research. And if it's something the committee's interested in, there is a lot here. So the legislature did give us some increments that we could have implemented, but I believe we did not. And then they also did some hold harmless money. And we actually, I think, are still benefiting from that distribution. So there's a lot of pieces of this. I'm not sure we're prepared to get into all of that here, but I also don't want to confuse, increments. And I do think, I think we do have some increments that we could still implement, which would mean a higher GRT. But I want to also be clear that what you're seeing in this graph here is how we have essentially divvied up the pie of our GRT. We've dedicated it to particular things. And from a budgeting standpoint, that is something that we want to do very sparingly and very carefully, because when you dedicate a particular portion of revenue to a particular use, you've restricted that dollar amount, and it makes it very difficult to respond to needs over time. So this gets us into a big philosophical conversation, but I think it is important to know that in the ordinance and city code, there over the history of the city, there has been times when the governing body has dedicated a portion of GRT for a particular purpose, but I would caution us about doing that and thinking very hard before we, I don't think it's best practice in terms of budgeting. Like if we have a priority that we think we need to be dedicating dollars to, then we should budget it in that direction, and leave us the flexibility to do that, to change that year to year or over time. So anyway, yeah, and if the committee wants to get into the food tax and the hold harmless and how they tried to keep the impact of not having that tax around, there's a lot there that could be brought forward. And it's important. So I don't know, maybe we should talk about that a little bit.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Thank you. Yes, so what shows on this slide is what's currently in place. So with that, I will move on to fees and services. So we saw on the pie chart, fees and services make up 30%, 33% of our total revenue, so about a third, and about half of that came from our utilities. So, not all municipalities have utilities. Some are separate entities, but in Santa Fe, we have a water utility, a solid waste utility, environmental services, and a wastewater utility. And approximately half of that 33% of the revenue from fees and services is from those three utilities: water, wastewater, and solid waste. As I mentioned before, those are enterprise funds. So an enterprise fund is referred to as a business type activity. They generate revenues sufficient to pay their expenses. And that's, the model is that any revenue that's generated by an enterprise fund is retained in that enterprise fund and used to pay the expenses for providing that service. The next largest category was parking. That was at about 5 million. That was 2.8% of fees and services. We also have ambulance fees, which is billing for ambulance services that we provide. And then the remaining balance of fees and services comes from a variety of different sources, everything from airport fees, convention center fees, transit, recreation, and internal service charges, which are internal transactions within the city where we charge one department for service provided by another department. An example of that would be IT. IT is an internal service fund. Moving on to intergovernmental grants. We have federal grants and state and local grants. Incidentally, for FY24, the amounts were very similar. We got about $14.5 million each in FY24 from federal and 14.5 from state and local grants. Of that, a lot of the federal grant funding came from the Department of Transportation, 6.22 million. Then we had a significant amount of ARPA and a fairly large amount, 1.77 million from the FAA for airport. On the state and local side, we've received quite a bit of pass-through funding from NMDOT, 5.88 million for CIP and 4.12 million for aviation. This is not a complete list of all of our grants. This is just some of the major ones. And, between the two, they're almost $30 million. So that's a significant a revenue source for the city and one that we want to continue to grow. There was a question a while ago now about cannabis excise tax revenue. So you'll see here that about $1.6 million is what the city has received from the state of New Mexico for cannabis excise tax revenue so far since the inception of that program. Now, I want to just quickly note here that cannabis excise tax only applies to recreational cannabis sales. Medical sales are exempt from both gross receipts tax and cannabis excise tax. And we do also get gross receipts tax on the sale of recreational cannabis, but it's not separated in the reporting that we get from Tax and Rev. It's combined with other agricultural products. So we just see it as part of our agricultural line on our RP 500, which is the GRT report that we get from the state of New Mexico. So this is, what we've seen so far. So about 1.6 million over 3 fiscal years in relation to, $206 million in total taxes generated in just FY24. So we are getting some money from cannabis excise tax, and we're grateful for that. But in relation to some of our other revenue sources, it's not a huge amount. With that, Madam Chair, I'm happy to stand for any questions. We do have our Assistant Finance Director, Alexis Lutero, our Accounting Officer, Matt Bonifer, our Budget Officer, Andy Hopkins, here in the room. And then online, we have Clarence Romero, who is our Treasury Officer, and we're happy to stand for any questions that you have about our revenues.
So I just want to go back really quickly on this cannabis piece and make sure I'm understanding you. So there is a tax on the sale of recreational cannabis itself, and then there's a GRT tax in addition, but which piece is it that's not broken out? So it's the cannabis GRT isn't broken out from other GRT, just regular GRT.
Correct, Madam Chair. So recreational cannabis sales are subject to 2 different taxes. It's similar to alcohol or tobacco. they're subject to gross receipts tax and also the separate excise.
Okay. So,
Sometimes excise taxes are referred to as sin taxes because they're often imposed on.
right. So what we're seeing, these totals are just for the dedicated tax on cannabis. They don't reflect the GRT that we get from it because you can't break that out from the overall GRT.
That's correct, Madam Chair. So in addition to the cannabis excise tax, the retail sale of cannabis is also subject to our regular gross receipts tax at the 8.175%. The reporting that we get from the Tax and Rev Department provides us with information about the agricultural
Right.
subsector of the economy, and cannabis falls within that. But it doesn't, and we also, for example, have a retail subsector. Some cannabis may be getting reported under retail as well. So these numbers on this slide here only represent the excise tax portion because that's the only one that we can directly attribute to recreational cannabis.
Got it. I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Questions from the committee? Yes, Counselor Garcia.
Madam Chair. So in the schedule, and I know that you mentioned the 25th of every month that we receive our, well, not every month, but the following month. I know that at some times, some businesses who meet a certain threshold have to pay a little earlier. At times, the state requires an earlier payment over a certain amount. And so if does the state hold that money or do we receive all of it at the same time?
Madam Chair and councilors, Councilor Garcia, so there are different types of taxes that are paid to the state. So there could be an earlier deadline
Like
for,
gross receipts tax. So like a business that collects more than X amount of gross receipts tax required to pay ahead of time and not the 25th. So would they hold on to that money or do they disperse the money to the city or to the entities at the same time, no matter what?
Madam Chair and Councilor Garcia, so the state only makes one round of distributions for each month. Occasionally, there are adjustments. They might make corrections if there's a major change, but that's rare. So normally, we only get one distribution a month for the sales that occurred 2 months previously from the state.
I think the state just maybe takes a little more time to get that money and understand that it's correct and do their audit process. That's just my observation. Thank you.
Okay, I have asked for this revenue presentation, and I really appreciate the staff being here tonight and putting it together. I think I just think it's good for us to see sort of a 30,000-foot view of, we see this stuff in the budget when it comes forward, but we don't often have much time to focus on it. And I think it's just helpful to kind of see the different sources of revenue that help the city to meet its needs. So if there aren't any other questions, we'll move on. And I don't see anybody waving at me. So thank you all for being here and putting this together. Really appreciate it. Okay, we will move on. Can find the agenda. Maybe I'll just go here. All right. We had a number of things pulled off of consent. Item E, request for approval of 2023 Hazard Mitigation Grant Program Sub-Grant Agreement. I won't read the number, in the total amount of $364,820.91 with the New Mexico Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management for stormwater projects. And we have a number of people here, including Brian Williams and Zoe Isaacson, who's our stormwater guru. And Councilor Lindell, did you pull this? Oh, sorry, I didn't get a list of who pulled what. So, Councilor Cassidy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you both for being here. I pulled this because I'm really excited about this project. happening in District 4. This is a park that I know can cause some challenges, both from a structural standpoint, as well as it is and so I'm not sure that you guys might not be the correct people to answer this question. But it can be an attractive nuisance. We've seen a lot of issues in this park because of how it's sunk down. There's not a lot of public view. There's a bridge that a lot of activity can occur in. And so I'm curious with some of this design, if there is going to be an ability to mitigate a piece of those social issues that come in with this. And then I also do want to talk about Arroyo de los Pinos. So that'll be you, Zoe. But let's start with the attractive nuisance piece.
I think that this project does offer some possibilities and potential to address some of those issues. With every project that we do, we have a public, outreach component and public engagement. So we hope that folks come out and do voice their concerns with our engineers. And so I am hopeful that we can address some of those concerns. All of them, I'm not sure, but we can definitely hear everybody out and try to help where we can. Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. I'm happy to hear that. The other piece of this that I know can be a really big issue is again, because of the design, I know weed management can be a really big challenge here. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about how this is potentially going to assist us with that concern. During the summer, I always get a lot of calls from people about Mark Brandt that it hasn't been weeded. And then, when I talk to parks, it has been, it just, the way that it's designed, it attracts water in there. So it really promotes that growth.
Yeah.
So we'd be able to work with that.
Well, the good news is that we're not intending to direct any more water to the park than is already getting to the park. So in that regard, we won't be exacerbating the issue by any means. Our hope is to be able to utilize the water that is making it to the park and sink it and infiltrate it and really relieve some of the pressure on the downstream system in the Arroyo de los Pinos. And so what that looks like, I am unsure of that at this point because we'll be looking at all concepts, and trying to really evaluate which is the most effective of what our overall goal is, which is really, again, to infiltrate, sink, improve water quality, and relieve pressure on the Arroyo de los Pinos. I hear that concern, and Melissa and I can definitely try to relay that to the engineers and also kind of brainstorm some different sessions on or different ideas on how we can hopefully maybe do a 2-for-1 and mitigate some of the weeds. But right now I can't really speak to that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then you started to talk about the Arroyo de los Pinos, and this is one that, again, I hear a lot of concerns from constituents about trash being built up, that there's debris that builds up that makes them concerned about flooding. I think everybody still has the memory of the 2018 floods very fresh in their brain. And I know, so that really comes up quite frequently and concerns a lot of my constituents. So can you actually speak in a little bit more detail about what that's going to look like? How is it going to impact, and where along the Arroyo de los Pinos are we actually going to see that impact occurring? Because I know that, I've had issues like up by like Camino Chueco and that area, but that's upstream from Mark Brandt. So I don't know if that's going to be impacted there, if it's just going to be everything downstream.
Yeah, so when we talk about the Arroyo de los Pinos in relation to this Mark Brandt project, it would really just be everything downstream. So not too far downstream, we also have the confluence of the Arroyo de los Pinos and the Arroyo Chamizo. So that by holding, kind of attenuating that flood pulse, we're relieving some of that pressure downstream so that when those two channels come together, that confluence isn't, quite as crazy as it would be if we didn't have this flood attenuation. So that's the intent with this project. We do have 3 projects. We are getting close to a final design at the Arroyo de los Pinos crossing at Corte de Princesa. And so that will also help. We're hoping to kind of upsize the culvert crossing and do some really heavy duty bank stabilization and energy dissipation. So with that project, we're hoping to kind of just really have a more robust system that's really resilient to kind of those flood pulses. And so that work, we're very close to getting final design on. We also have a project just upstream of there that is happening as we speak. The surveyor is out on site. That's at the Avenida de las Panas. And that is a project that's really focusing on the I guess the issues that we saw that stem from the 2018 flood. So the Arroyo overtopped there and there was some damage that was caused. So that project is a repair to fix kind of the roadway and some of the culverts and also the kind of stabilizing structures that were I wouldn't say destroyed, but that were affected by that pulse. And then we just completed another in-channel stabilization project that just got completed maybe 2 weeks ago. Again, just upstream, kind of behind. I always get it mixed up because I live right next to Alamo Drive, and this is Alamos. Alamosa, there we go. So right behind Alamosa near Herb Martinez Park, we just completed another kind of repair that is also dealing with roadway drainage getting into the Arroyo, and that will also have some energy dissipation. So really what our aim is to work in whole reaches and provide energy dissipation and points of infiltration all along the Arroyo so that we can just kind of attenuate flood pulses and also dissipate energy wherever possible.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm really excited to see this work happening. Definitely hear a lot about it. So this is the first I'm hearing of this. So glad that is occurring. I know that this has been a really big issue in District 4. And the focus on Mark Brandt, I'm very excited to see. I know a lot of my constituents still love to use it. And they have some concerns. And so this is a really wonderful opportunity. So thank you both for being here. Thank you, Brian. I know this is coming out of your department, so thank you for working on this and getting us these dollars and bringing them down. And very excited to see the collaboration.
If you'd be good enough to indulge me,
Absolutely.
I would like to recognize the cadre of people involved in this. Kyle Morgan, of course, of my staff, Justin Gonzalez, who's with Community Health and Safety Finance, Zoe, Alona Pro, and of course, Regina and Melissa, all participated in putting together. As you know, we have 4 sub-grant agreements for a total of $1.7 million on the table. So we're very excited about it. I would also be delighted and encourage you to take a look at the city mitigation plan, which does have a list of projects. One of the grant agreements we have is for the update of the city mitigation plan. It's a 5-year renewal. And so this would be an opportunity to have projects in your districts. And you recognize there's been a problem. By all means, let's get it on the list, because when this mitigation funding becomes available, then we have an opportunity to spend it on the projects.
Thank you. That's really helpful information. Can you send that mitigation plan our way?
It's on the website under emergency management plans.
Not always easy to navigate that thing, but I'll do my best. So, well, thank you so much. And thank you for pointing out all the people that have really been working together. It's really wonderful to hear that collaboration between the departments is occurring in ways that's really going to benefit the community.
Hold on just a second. You're done. Anybody else want to jump in? I just want to ask, so the mitigation plan is not just for stormwater. It's emergency overall,
All
big umbrella, anything you can think of. Okay, great. Other questions from the committee? Thank you. And is there a motion?
Move to approve?
Motion and a second to approve this item. I think we need to do a roll call. Am I correct?
Yes, Madam Chair. Councillor Cassett,
Yes.
Councillor Lindell, Councillor Faulkner,
Yes.
Councillor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. All right, we are on now to item H. Request for approval of Addendum A to Professional Services Agreement, to Professional Services Agreement Item number 23-0595 with De Novo to increase the compensation for cloud storage and maintenance of the City of Santa Fe AS400 data by $1,819,244 for a new total of $3,196,884.77, and to extend the termination date to June 30th, 2027. We have our IT Department Director online, Mr. Candelaria, and Counselor Lindell, I think you pulled this item.
Thanks for being here, Mr. Candelaria. Help me through this a little bit. How long do we have to do this? Is there an end in sight? Could it end prior to $1.8 million? Tell me the bigger story of this.
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, first, apologies for not being there in person. So in reviewing this request, it looks like the numbers that were sent over were the incorrect numbers. So the original contract, so a little backstory. The De Novo contract is the contract that we have with the vendor to migrate our current UCIS, JD Edwards, and E1 applications from the green screen to an on-prem to the cloud. This removes us from the issues with our legacy hardware. Part of that contract also was included about 60 hours per quarter for support. In the last 6 months or so, we've noticed that we don't really have a strong skill set in the AS400. So we've been kind of patchworking together what we needed to request from the vendor to do some extra support work with us, which at this point we decided that we should amend their current contract to actually include support hours. So the original contract was set for $1.156,044. The request we had to amend was to add an additional $663,200, which would make the total compensation $1.8,019,244. The amount that is in the agenda is 3.196, which is almost double the amount of the contract. So there's an inaccuracy there when we're only asking to amend the current contract from 1.1 million 56,044 to 1.8 million 19,240. The contract length will stay as is till the end of June 2027. Our hope is that the sooner that we can get on to an advanced billing system for utilities, we could ease off this contract and put to bed our legacy hardware and software. But this is our mitigation plan for disaster recovery, ongoing support for the current AS400. I know that was a lot of words and a lot of numbers thrown at you there.
Heard you say, or I think I heard you say, that we weren't strong in the AS400.
Yes.
How could that possibly be, that we have a system that we've had for that long, that we're limping through it, and because we got to get rid of it because it's so old? How can we not have anybody that has strength in that system?
Because of the age of the legacy hardware, a lot of the young talent that we're bringing in does not have that background. We did have some recent AS400 administrators retire. So that's just a skill set that is hard to fill because of the age of the software. We've got some really good, talented systems administrators who are learning the system, but they don't know the system, the AS400, as well as the most senior administrators that are out there. It's just hard to find talent for that.
So are the numbers are these numbers correct, what is in front of me?
In the agenda,
My 1.8, is that a correct number?
so Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, the 1.819,244 is the new total amount for the de novo contract until the end of June 2027.
Are we gonna need this contract that long?
My hope is not. My hope is that, that we solidify a vendor for the utility billing system that will help us migrate that to a new version of advanced billing or billing system, I should say, not advanced billing. But until then, we still have the current AS400, which is legacy hardware, that is almost out of support from IBM. IBM extended their support globally for one more year because a lot of people still have or a lot of other entities still have a lot of AS400 legacy hardware in their IT shops. So it's becoming an aged system. This one will allow us to migrate it to the cloud, which will alleviate the on-prem aspect of faulty hardware failing. It won't remove us from the green screen at this point, but it will at least alleviate us from having any on-prem issues because it'll be stored up in the cloud.
So does this all have to do? Councilor Romero Worth knows exactly what I'm going to ask. Is this all part of utility billing that this is why this is in front of us?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, I would say because I would say yes.
You would say because of what?
I would say yes to your question.
I just can't fathom how we are still doing utility billing issues. I think we've been, I don't know, how long have you been on the council, Councilor Romero Worth? 8 years? Started before that. I don't know how it is that we haven't gotten this figured out in 8 years. This is not directed to you, Mr. Candelaria. I'm wondering if part of the issue is the number of IT directors that we've been through. I don't know what the issue is, but we've spent millions and millions and millions on this utility billing, and we aren't there yet. And this is saying that we're looking at 2027. That's 3 more years of this. I'm dumbfounded by it. I'm discouraged by it. I'm depressed by it.
Councilor Lindell, I think I could give you a little bright spot, which is Public Works and Public Utilities has been hearing presentations about this. And the department has done, I think it's called an IV&V, something like that, which is a way to take a 30,000-foot look at what the issues are and figure out how to handle them. And I think we have a very good consultant who is on board, and I think there are timelines for correcting. And so I do think we're handling this in a different way and in a way that ultimately will get us through this. I can't disagree that it's taken way too long. And
It's millions
yeah,
and
and
millions
yes,
and
it is.
millions
But I
of
think there's,
dollars.
I just want to tell you, I think there is some progress being made. Director Wheeler's at the podium. I don't know if she's there to weigh in on this, but I do think there's some progress, and I think that Director Dupuy has helped get us on a course that hopefully gets this resolved, because you're right, we have spent a lot of money. Director Wheeler, were you here to?
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Chair. I did want to also clarify that actually there's a whole bunch of us stuck on this AS 400, and there is a whole bunch of work to be done. We need to implement some modules of Munis so that we're not, anybody who takes point of sale cash is still on the old system. And we're having to manually duplicate entry. So it's a really important undertaking to get this thing stabilized and then move our attention to get us off of this old system. We've been on it in parking since I got here, and we really need to get off of it. There's a lot of other departments that are actually still using AS 400, so it is important that it's stabilized. And that, you know, as you're saying, Councilor Lindell and Madam Chair said, that we really get focused on moving us off of it in an efficient manner.
I don't have anything else.
Okay, is there a motion?
Second.
Motion is second. Is there any further discussion, questions, concerns, frustrations? If we could get a roll call, please.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Councillor Cassett,
Yes.
Councillor Lindell, Councillor Faulkner,
Yes.
Councillor Lee Garcia, Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Director Candelaria, for being with us tonight. Appreciate it.
Madam Chair.
Okay, we are
Thank you.
moving on to item I, request for approval of New Mexico Department of Finance and Administration General Fund 93100 Capital Appropriation Project 24-13147 in the amount of $240,000 to replace the Santa Fe River pedestrian bridge at Shelby Street with a reversion date of June 30th, 2028. Welcome, Mr. Overly, our Parks and Open Space Project Administrator. And we also have Director Wheeler with us tonight. Like your new jacket, that's pretty spiffy. Love the color, love the logo. Where do I get one of those? All right, Councilor Lindell, did you want to?
Thank you. This is a project that I have a great amount of interest in. I'm just requesting that I be kept up to date on this project and where we are. I know that I've had some conversations with Director Wheeler about this project. I'm just requesting that I be kept up to date on this. I think that, you know, this is an existing bridge. It's a little dumbfounding to me, and I've had these conversations with Director Wheeler that, once again, I think this is a footbridge across a pretty short span. What's the span on this? Do you have any idea?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, it's approximately 80 feet, I believe.
80?
80.
Is that far?
Yeah.
I'm surprised. I thought it would be more like 50, but nonetheless, I think that $265,000 to design that footbridge that's already existing seems just beyond expensive to me. So I would really like to be kept in the loop of how this project goes and what our bids look like. And hopefully we can get this moved along.
I would just note, I think, so this was a project I was very interested in for a while because it was in District 2 and then redistricting happening, and now I think it's in District 1. And I think there is a lot of interest in the community on this and a lot of concern over some of the cost estimates. And so I think this is something that there are a number of us who are interested in being kept up to date as you get into it and figure out what needs to be done and kind of the work that's associated with it. So just an additional comment, but I don't think it requires a response. Did you need a response, Councilor Lindell?
Madam Chair, I will give you a response and say that we will keep you up to date. Absolutely.
Okay,
This moves through.
great. Is there a motion on this?
Move to approve.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Can we get a roll call, please? Thank you, Director Overly, for being here tonight.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Councillor Cassett,
Yes.
Councillor Lindell, Councillor Faulkner, Councillor Lee Garcia, Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. All right, we are on to item J, request for approval of New Mexico Department of Finance and Administration General Fund 93-100 Capital Appropriation Project 24-13142 in the amount of $5 million for improvements at Fort Marcy Park with a reversion date of June 30th, 2028. Mr. Overly, you're still with us. Thank you. And Councilor Lindell, I believe you pulled this as well.
I'm just essentially asking to be kept up to date on this. Clearly enough, it's a park that is dear to the entire city. I have a lot of constituents that pay a lot of attention to this park. We've been there before together. Please keep me in the loop of where we are in the use of this $5 million. I think this is the $5 million that the governor put toward Fort Marcy Park. Yes.
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, yes, that is correct. This is the legislative capital outlay that was put up for Fort Marcy Park.
I just would very much like to be kept in the loop of where we are with this and how it's progressing. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve this item. Can we get a roll call, please?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Councillor Cassett,
Yes.
Councillor Lindell,
Yes.
Councillor Faulkner,
Yes.
Councillor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee members. Appreciate it.
Okay, that's the end of our consent agenda items that have been pulled. We do not have anything on the discussion agenda, although we do have introduction of legislation. And I will do that. That's consideration of resolution number 2024, being sponsored by Mayor Alan Weber, establishing the City of Santa Fe's priorities for consideration by the New Mexico State Legislature during the 57th Legislature, State of New Mexico, for session 2025. And again, this is just introduction, so that's done. And from here, we'll go to matters from staff. Director Oster.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have two things for you tonight. One is an update on the FY24 audit. We're currently in the process of completing that. We met with Carr Riggs Ingram today. Carr Riggs is our external auditor, and we've continued to have weekly audit progress check-in meetings with them. So we had a good meeting with them today. Carr Riggs is currently working on pulling samples, which is part of their substantive and control testing procedures, and looking at some variances, doing variance analysis. We expect a heavy focus on the single audit, which is the federal compliance audit, next week. We have our Clifton Larson Allen contractors providing support to ensure completion of the audit on a timely basis. And we are on track for an on-time submittal to the state auditor's office. It's about a month out. On another front, I wanted to give you an update on the implementation of our Questica budget software. We've talked quite a bit about The contract is now in place and we have defined the project team. Assistant Finance Director Alexis Lotero, who was here earlier this evening, is our project lead. The Budget Division team, which consists of our Budget Officer Andy Hopkins, Anita Medina, who is our Principal Budget Analyst, and our Senior Budget Analysts, Christina Martinez and Chris Parker, are both part of our project team. And then we have Patrick Lucero, who is in our Finance Administration group, who is our IT Project Manager, as part of the project team as well. The project team is currently working on planning and preparing for the implementation of Questica. The timeline is to kick off the implementation activities in May of 2025 with completion by December of 2025. And the things that we're most excited about, some of the highlights of what we will get with Questica, include improvements to our budget book and the process for preparing the budget book. We'll be able to discontinue the use of Excel spreadsheets in the building of the budget, which is currently, the main tool. Excel and Access are our main tools that we're using in the budgeting process. We will have added flexibility and transparency for departments throughout the process, and better and more sophisticated reporting, which includes the automation of our quarterly DFA report. Currently, we're using a labor-intensive access-based process for that, so we're excited about automating that. Improved design of the quarterly report that we present to the Finance Committee, budget to actuals reports, reporting on encumbrances, and the ability to run different scenarios in terms of determining how a certain set of facts would affect the budget overall for the city or the revenue projections. So, Madam Chair, those are my updates tonight for matters from staff.
Great, thank you. Matters from the committee. Matters from the chair. So I want to we have one more meeting left in this year, which is really extraordinary. And I believe it's December 9th. Is that correct? On my calendar, it's December 9th. Okay, so just so it didn't get noted in this new software we're using, I don't think, well, actually, I didn't look at the old one. But anyway, just confirming. So our next meeting will be Monday, December 9th. It's the last one of this year. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all.